Welcome to Baruch Menashe's podcast. This is a space for rigorous exploration of human development, psychology, and social interactivity. Each episode examines the underlying structures of thought, behavior, and interaction, offering insights drawn from education, research, and philosophical reflection. Here we engage deeply with ideas, question assumptions, and illuminate the patterns that shape both individual growth and collective experience. Join me as we unpack complex concepts and translate them into understanding, perspective, and meaningful dialogue. What is required of an establishment that is thus intersected with social phenomena is almost as primary as the social phenomenon itself. The established precedent organizes the information, psyche material, and internal social process in order to allow a fulfilled intersection to take place. Although the established precedent does not exemplify itself in the manner that would be approached as a social sentiment itself, all because it is in the establishing process. What engineers the establishment, even the connotation of establishment as something that is archaic and traditional, is the very notion that it is impossible to generate a social framework from which to participate with sentiment if it is in the establishing precedent. Because of this, not only is there a lack of informational detail of establishing process, it is also without intention or motivation to enjoin it, such a faculty of process. Even the notion of organizational process is the attribute of applying specific aspects that are in its regular stance unavailable to be set in a criteria that streamlines with other organizational aspects. And it's only through the organization, which as its primary constitution is to delineate what is external to it, to then proceed to apply attributes from one to another so that there is a motionability between aspects in a manner where we can consider it to be a full-fledged organization, capital O. Without the organization, that is, if an individual is not organized psychologically, materially, structurally, then the process for which they enjoin does not meet, according to its attributes, sufficient enough for other aspects of their process. The problem is in the extreme critical nature of what is not organized, as though it is somehow not exacting as an exemplified existence, which is contrary to what is occurring. What is most existent is not organized. It doesn't have the ability to be organized because it is so existent, it is so animated that its attributes are unavailable to a continuous process between other organizational elements. It is only de facto of the organizational theme that it allows to be applied through a framework called the organization. Suffice to say that the criticalness of non-organizational status is only by virtue of one who is laden and beholden to an organizational theme for which it cannot be understood in any criteria, something unorganized to be existent more so than what is organized. What is organized is, in fact, non-existent, which allows it to be organized, to be set in place. What is most organized is least animated. The contrary is not the same. What is least organized to be most animated, because there is organic process that is not animated nor sufficient or purposeful for organization. It is only the case that animated process that does not have an organizational bedrock or final process begins to become erratic and dysfunctional. We need to correct even the term dysfunction in this context, because it is not dysfunctional that it is lacking all functionality. It is rather a function that is so purposeful for each of its aspects that it cannot function alongside other aspects. It is also the tenacity towards the psychiatric individual, the psychiatric psyche, or beholden to a psychiatric institution, that it is, although dysfunctional, it is somehow inhuman as well. Contrary to this, it is most human, most exemplified as an animating psyche and its specifics, so much that it is unavailable to the organizational theme that allows for coherency between social process. If we were to create a world experience solely based on the psyche happenstance of the individual, solely based on the internality, and unequivocal to social exchange and process, we would find an enlightening, sufficient experience of being, almost more so than in the regular reality framework of social process. It is only through the lens of social normativity, but more so social receptivity, in which we can continue alongside that being in reflective properties without so much as degrading our own psyche, that we come to the view that it is somehow dysfunctional and thus non-existent, or less existent so than other beings. Of course, this is the biological justification for applying a metric of value according to what can be engineered through social continuance, and to remove that which cannot be applied as such, because the social group is most developed according to its continuity and development, and this being is in some way contrary to that. But once we remove the social lens, once we remove the perspective of such, and we apply a reality framework irrespective of social process, we find an enlightening procedure and experience. Even more so, we can apply an organizational theme, a coherency, which will develop alongside that psyche dysfunction, to both obtain a reality and framework of animated process, as well as an organizational theme in which can be applied to regular individuals. This is in how a psychiatrist, one who is a clinician in this environment, is both part of social process as well in partaking with such a psyche, such a dysfunctional psyche, in that they contain a organizational theme according to those highly animated social processes of that psyche, which don't correlate with social normativity. That is in the case in which there is no organizational theme, in which the animating properties don't correlate with one another because of the proclivity of each one to be a subjective whole that is so powerful and unavailable to its correlation. Organizational property is thus required not so much for the proclivity of those aspects to be accessed, but more so to be correlated, to apply a contract of value between them, to scale each aspect in accordance with the organizational theme, sometimes to enlarge and amplify one in contrast to the other, and others to dilute for the purpose of the organizational whole. In doing so, one can articulate the theme, then correlate those aspects in a way where each one is accessible through the other. In the regular case, the specific aspect is available to access only by itself, only through the aspect itself. But from the organizational perspective, although amplifying or setting limitations on certain aspects, it does allow for access between aspects according to that organizational spectrum. And this way, the contractual setting allows for a fulfillment of process, both of the animated aspects and in what way they have been applied in correlation, so that it can be built in a stable manner. It could be built one on top of the other. It can be layered and sufficed for a full construction that can be set in place. The spectrum of organizational tenacity will be according to in how it controls and regulates the correlating aspects between parts. If it is completely controllable, then it is a sufficient construction, completely stable, but unavailable in access to its parts, since it went at the expense of their animation, as well as detriment in the exposure of the entire organizational theme. If we imagine a brick and mortar construction that contains no sociability, it acts in this manner of allowing some level of organization, but so distant from access to what is beyond it, what is contained by it, that we find it almost to be hostile as a construct. As well, in the other extreme, the first level of all organization is the conceptual construct, as noted as its construction of themes of consciousness, themes of sociability that are not based on material supposition, although contains a subjectification of such to allow it to reflect a current environment, but it is simply the allowance of some level of organizational theme. For example, in the way there's universal concepts such as birth and death and coming of age and other major life concepts that are organizational themes that cover animating aspects but do very little in regulating it, so that even when we mention it, it doesn't sound very stable and is rather referred to as a universal theme rather than what it truly is, as some limitation and thus a construct of organization.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.